Well, welcome to another episode of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Bollin, and we have a returning guest, Brian Hales, Dr. Brian Hales, on today to discuss the Book of Mormon and his work on this particular topic. So, Brian, I know you're a returning guest. You were on an episode with our mutual friend Craig Foster only a few weeks ago to discuss Mormon fundamentalism and all that kind of interesting material. And I'm sure, unless, of course, you've been living under a rock for the last 10 plus years, everyone in Mormon studies has heard of you, but just in case we have a few newbies here, how about you just give a brief overview of who you are and your background, interests, and so forth?
Well, I had a family member who was involved with fundamentalist polygamy back in 1989. And so I investigated their claims and wrote a little history, and then things progressed and I realized that there was no really well-researched history. So I tried to write that, and it was published in 2006. People asked me a lot of questions about Joseph Smith's polygamy, which I couldn't answer. So I hired Don Bradley to gather documents, which was key, and published 3 volumes on Joseph Smith's polygamy in 2013. About 2015, I changed direction, and the reason was that while I was researching Joseph Smith's polygamy, I would periodically have somebody ask me, "Aren't you afraid you're going to find out something about Joseph Smith that'll shake your testimony?" And honestly, that never was a concern to me. And the reason was, there was a specific reason, was I believed that back in 1829, Joseph Smith could not have produced the Book of Mormon using his own intellectual abilities. I mean, that was just this scientific conclusion I had that sustained my faith-based beliefs through all of that. And I didn't find anything that made me worry about Joseph's ability, his worthiness. He wasn't perfect. He did things I kind of wish he wouldn't have done, but nothing that was sinful to the point where he couldn't have been the prophet that I had always believed him to be. So anyway, in 2015, being done with polygamy, I jumped into this idea of, could Joseph Smith have produced the Book of Mormon? And so that's some of the material. I presented at FAIR a couple of times on this topic, but Robert, just so you know, today I'm going to present some material that hasn't been published, nor have I shared it anywhere else. And it's fun stuff. And I don't consider it apologetic, because I think it's just good research, and it doesn't have to evoke a lot of spirited discussion, except maybe regarding my methodologies, but that's good. I mean, if I'm faulty in my technique, then somebody needs to call us on it. But there's two. Anyway, that's a long introduction before I jump into everything else. Anything else that you wanted to add in here?
No, that's good. Of course, I'll be linking to your websites, such as the Joseph Smith Polygamy website and the Mormon Polygamy Documents website, as well as your interpreter page, because you've written actually a number of articles on the Book of Mormon, including a review of William Davis's book, Visions in the Seer Stone, as well as an article addressing some of the more problematic, shall we say, changes made to the Book of Mormon, such as the Benjamin Mosiah variant, and a few other things as well, including an article on hallucinogenics and the authorship of the Book of Mormon, which was about 50 pages. I reread it this week, so it was informative. I can't believe we have to write articles on this. Kind of shows how desperate some critics are, but it was very good, especially with your medical background. So no, that's good. And of course, as you mentioned, this is going to be a development and an expansion, or building upon your work, such as Mind the Gap, which was actually at the Fair Conference of 2021, which I was actually at, and actually did enjoy your presentation, by the way. So looking forward to the new material you'll be presenting. So I'll let you continue.
Great. Well, to begin, let me just ask 2 questions. And these are 2 questions I hope that believers, unbelievers, critics, scholars, wherever you fall on that spectrum, will address with some sincerity and seriousness. And the first question is, what skills would a person need to dictate a long, complex book? And the second question is, what skills did Joseph Smith possess in 1829? And I don't want to be snarky or critical or disrespectful, but it is my belief, having studied this since 2015, that the critics' answer to that is a two-level chiasm. It goes like this. What skills were needed? Answer, the skills Joseph had. What skills did Joseph have? Answer, the skills that were needed. And again, that's really what it's all about. But to break that circular reasoning, all we have to do is separate the questions. What skills were needed? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I don't know if we want to go through and look at Joseph Smith's history. I'm happy to do that. But the new material is really trying to identify the skills that a person would need to duplicate Joseph's efforts, or the skills Joseph manifested as he was dictating during that 3-month period. And so that's where we want to go. Any comments there, Robert? Or
No, I think that's pretty good, because I think all sides agree, like the historicist side, if you will, like your good self and myself, who believe it's a historical document, it's a translation, basically hashtag Joseph told the truth, if you will. And even critics like Dan Vogel et al. The Book of Mormon's a deliberate act. Joseph, if you hold to a naturalistic explanation, Joseph produced it. It wasn't like a spam email where you kind of put in like a few integers or whatever, and out comes kind of a message. It was a deliberate act, so one has to explain how it came about. So no, that's a good idea, and of course, like this assumes a non-Spalding theory of Book of Mormon origins. So for those who want a good good critique of Spalding, look up Matthew Roper and his reviews, or even Dan Vogel and the Tanners have actually refuted Spalding theory as well. So this is like assumes it's if the critics are correct, what's called the environmentalist view, or the 19th century view, like Joseph interacting and kind of coming up somehow through his pre-existing knowledge and pilfering, if you want to believe Colby Townsend, Adam Clark, and other sources as well. So, yeah. But no, I think that's a good approach. Because, as I said, like the Book of Mormon's a deliberate act, and you have to explain how it came about if you don't accept the supernaturalist perspective, if you will.
Well, and I'm not, people say I'm trying to prove the Book of Mormon is true. I'm not at all. But as we'll see as we go along, the question of natural ability, whether Joseph Smith's or anyone's, is whether it was sufficient. That question, I think, deserves additional consideration. But I'm going to, if it's okay, share a screen for what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. That's up there. This is a list of the literary characteristics of the Book of Mormon. It is not a list like Hugh Nibley created several decades ago called the Book of Mormon Challenge, where he went through and he made a list of all the things that you would need to do to recreate the Book of Mormon. Some of them are similar, but that was kind of a devotional thing, some of the elements that were on there. That's not what we're trying to do here. It's not what I'm trying to do. I want to just identify literary characteristics. Now, I'm not an English literature graduate. I don't have a master's or PhD in that. So someone with those qualifications could probably do a better job of isolating the literary devices and things that are found in the Book of Mormon. But if we just first start with this list, and I'm going to go through it in a minute, then we can work backwards to say, well, what skills would a person need who was going to create a book with all of these characteristics? And the word count is 269,320. And that's not a number I came up with. It was Stan Carmack, who's a lot smarter than I am, and he's studied the original text and everything. So I think that's one that we can hang our hats on. But it's interesting, there's almost 7,000 sentences, and their average length is 39.3. That's really long. That's 2 to 3 times the average sentence length of most of your fictional works. And there's questions, would that make it easier or harder? Some say that, if you're just rambling on, long sentences are easy. But honestly, if the long sentences occur because there's embedded ideas that you have to return to or something like that, it would be harder. And I would argue that's what's going on there, that this makes it more difficult. But I've had some pushback from people on that. It's not a big deal. There was no punctuation in the original manuscript, and some people say that would make it easier. Honestly, if you just try to text something to somebody and use no punctuation, I think at least if you're like me, or if you're writing and you don't use punctuation, the ideas don't get chopped up. Every time you see a comma or a period, your brain is able to process the material before that without those signals in the text. I argue it would probably make it more difficult, but take your pick. The reading level, and I wrote a paper on this at Interpreter Published where I submitted it to all of these engines that would analyze the text for reading level difficulty. Even one I had to pay $100 for him to do the analysis, but they come out between 6th grade and postgraduate, averaging right around an 8th grade level, which I think is probably pretty accurate. It's in what Stan Carmack calls and Royal Scales an early modern English. And what that is it's dictated quite consistently in a form of English that is not upstate New York 1820s, but also is really laborious to read in the original. And that's why Joseph Smith went through and made thousands of single word and double word changes in the text for the 1837, 1840 public printings. There are around 5,600 unique words, and that is not remarkable. If Joseph was a super genius, he certainly didn't demonstrate it by using only 5,600 words, more or less. That's sometimes like half the diversity of other popular fictional works. There are in the book dozens of college-level vocabulary words that are not in the Bible, and these, to learn a vocabulary word, you have to do some study. Usually, you can read it over and over in books and maybe gather the definition and the ability to use it in your own sentences. But generally, some practice would be required, and you can rate vocabulary words. There's an app on the internet that you can download, and the way it determines a word to be difficult is it goes to a lot of tests for grades 1 through college, and by looking at those texts and the words that are used by looking at those tests and looking at the words they use, they judge, the people writing the test, how difficult the words were. And there's dozens of college level words in the Book of Mormon. It's interesting, Joseph Smith made up 170 proper nouns, new proper nouns. And of course, that's not that hard. All of us can do that. But again, it takes some work. And the question comes up for Joseph's situation: did he make these up ahead of time and memorize them, or did he create these on the fly while he was dictating? There are 207 named characters. And I have a book-length manuscript. All of them are listed there. And these are mentioned in the text of the Book of Mormon 3,780 times, and probably with 2 mistakes. This demonstrates pretty good memory, but the 2 mistakes, of course, is Benjamin and Mosiah being juxtaposed, and Don Bradley and Royal Scalzon, I think, question whether that was even necessary. But for the most part, the named individuals are kept very straight during the dictation. A curious finding is that the main protagonist, who is God, has over 100 different references to him. And again, that to me is just a surprising thing, kind of a fun thing to look at. There's 2 long genealogies that are followed very strictly and very accurately. There's 45 social geographic groups mentioned over 1,600 times. There are 77 major storylines. And they're not simplistic. Really, none of them are. And again, I'm borrowing this from other authors, but you can look at each of these, and they would require a little bit of preparation. There's 5 flashbacks and embedded stories, which when you're writing a book, you can look back to other pages, but transferring that over to a dictation, to a word stream that undergoes no major modification after it's spoken, that's a big deal. There are 12 geographic sites in the Old World. You'd have to have some access to maps to understand those. There's around 149 geographical locations in the Promised Land. These are referenced 670 times with 2 mistakes. There's 2 of them that are pretty clearly mistakes. They really don't mean anything. They're in the fight the war sections of Alma. But there are 2 errors. Ecological references are over 2,000. There's 3 chronological systems mentioned 180 times. Again, one of those seems to be off by 2.5 years, 2 years. There's 63 sermons comprising 87,000 words, and these deal with dozens of topics, some of them in great detail, and there's a lot of commentary with that. There's also similarities in phraseology to the Bible. We call that intertextuality. Nick Frederick has identified 650 allusions. And then we get to the fun topic of chiasms and alternates. And there's over 800 of these. And I think everybody probably knows what they are. We'll talk about them more in a minute. But a new one that I've added recently is multivalency. And what that means is that you can read the text once and get one set of valuable ideas out of it, and then you can read it again and get additional things. And this is not something that you would necessarily probably find if you were reading Great Expectations or Moby Dick. I mean, you could gather new details each time, but the Book of Mormon claims to be portraying useful truths and philosophical ideas, religious ideas, and putting multivalency into the text as you're dictating. I think it would be difficult. I don't know how you do that, actually, but it is a characteristic of the Book of Mormon. Stylometric consistencies. We probably all heard about the word studies that identify either similar authors. I think one study said that the Book of Mormon is very similar to Sidney Rigdon or something, or you mentioned the manuscript found by Spalding. They're pretty dubious. There's some done by Latter-day Saint researchers that I think are more credible, but I think I don't spend a lot of time on this. We won't today, but the reality is that if somebody is reading the Book of Mormon, you really can just tell a difference when you go from Nephi to Jacob, and from Jacob into the Mormon scribe accounts, and from Mormon to Moroni, the types of words they like, the way they refer to deity. I mean, you don't have to get a computer out to say, yeah, Nephi writes different than Mormon. And if this is something coming out of Joseph Smith's head, that's a skill. That's a skill set to be able to shift the vernacular so that it reflects a different author. You know, there's a skill there, something you'd have to have at your disposal as you're dictating. There's headings and editorial promises that are plugged in from time to time. There's internal historical sources that are referenced multiple times. There's 24, but there's actually more than that, but those are the primary ones. And that just is one more level of memory that you have to remember, you know, what did I say about that document that I'm now going to refer to as you're dictating? And then there's at least 3 subjects that are discussed with a level of precision that would probably require some research and reading or something. Biblical law, olive tree husbandry, and warfare tactics. So these are the literary characteristics. And with this list, we then can go to ask that question, what skills are needed? Because without this list, you can say what skills are needed, but you don't really have your handle on exactly the specific things that the Book of Mormon presents to its readers that a person duplicating Joseph's effort would have to replicate. But here we've got a whole list of 30-something that we can say, okay, we want somebody to duplicate what Joseph did, and we're going to pay them lots of money to do it or something, whatever we can do to incentivize them to do it. But these are what we want them to reproduce. So what kind of skills would they have to possess? So I'm going to stop sharing there, Robert. I don't know. Do you have any comments? Sorry to be so long-winded on that.
Oh, no. I think that's a good overview, like the topics one could discuss. And of course, like for those listening, like you could write an entire book on like most of those topics singularly, like the one on names or the old world geography. But at the same time, it does kind of show that the Book of Mormon is, by its nature, a pretty complex text. It's not this kind of very simplistic narrative and so forth. So, as you know, like there's a lot of internal consistency and so forth. So, and even at like an 8th grade reading level, when it comes to Joseph Smith's education, that's still pretty impressive, and a host of other things as well. So, and I'm kind of glad you kind of Or saying like this is not the same as Unibli's rather at times simplistic Book of Mormon challenge. As much as I like you, I'm not a fan of that kind of apologetic, but I think this is like a good, a better approach to the issue of the Book of Mormon and its complexity and its production.
Well, and I've actually shared this list with some critics, and the response I've had so far, and I'm sure there'll be more if I can ever get a book or article published that talks about this, but their response was really that I was just padding the difficulty somehow by creating the list. I didn't think that was a very adequate response because these are just observations. I hope there's nothing apologetic there. And the example that the 5,600 word diversity is really not impressive tells you that we're just trying to identify the things that are there and positive or negative with respect to how difficult it would be to produce. So with that, I've identified 9 skills. And Robert, if you have insights into some of this, please help, because some of them are obvious, but the last 3 were really hard to come up with, and I'll explain why. You'll see why as we get to them. But
well, if I have any comments, I'll butt in. But until then, I'll just let you go ahead if that's okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, please feel free to jump in because you're a lot smarter than I am, and I appreciate your perspective. So, but the first skill that kind of overrides the whole effort is self-motivation. Somebody who writes a novel needs to be highly motivated. And somebody said, and I tried to find the actual source of this, but for every 100,000 people who want to write a novel, 1,000 will start it. For every 1,000 who start it, 100 will finish it. For every 100 who finish it, 1 will get it published or something. I mean, these numbers that tell you that it isn't something that somebody just wakes up someday and says, look, I'm going to create a 100,000 word novel today and finish it in 3 months. That you have to be motivated all the way along. You have to be motivated to get the skills that we're talking about. And then you have to be motivated every day to get up and perform the act of authorship. And so we just kind of have to surround that. And people will say, well, Joseph, was ego driven or he wanted money. If he were as smart as some say he was to be able to do this, and he wanted money or wanted power or sex or whatever, there were a lot easier ways to go about getting it than creating a 270,000 word book. He probably could have created a 50,000 word book and had the exact same response. The verbosity of the Book of Mormon really reflects a lot of motivation that is difficult, at least from my perspective, to explain. The second skill is imagining skill. And I'm talking about creativity. The Book of Mormon has 77 storylines. They don't create themselves. And if you'll, again, I've got them all listed with who's doing what. And if you look at these, they're not that simplistic. Some of them are, but most of them are not. There's interactions and things. They're pretty much 2-dimensional. I readily admit that, but there's a lot of them. And each one would have required some contemplation and some effort. And at this point, let me just introduce a theme that will happen over and over, is that there's 77 of them. Did Joseph Smith make these up ahead of time and memorize it? Or was he generating these, in real time? Since I don't think that's how they were made up, I don't offer an explanation. But for the naturalists, they kind of have to confront that question. Did he have, some say there was a manuscript that was made up. There's no evidence for that. If Joseph had a manuscript, it would have been very difficult to hide because the manuscript pages were huge, and there were a lot of them. The Book of Mormon had 588 pages. And the number, we lost 116 with Martin, but to hide a manuscript from everybody, which would have had to have happened because nobody mentions one, would have been a challenge. So,
especially with the how the Book of Mormon was translated, like using the stone in the hat, like how could he actually, even if he like stuffed the pages in the hat, how could he actually have read it? So yeah.
Well, a few years ago, I met Sandra Tanner, and she's a delightful lady. She's with Gerald and Sandra Tanner, Utah Lighthouse Ministry. But she told me that her husband, before he passed away, had done a test where they actually could put some holes in the bottom of a hat and read a manuscript held beneath it. And I wasn't quite sure if she was really serious that this could be explanatory for how Joseph Smith did it. To me, it wasn't persuasive then. It still isn't, because there's too many witnesses, and many of the witnesses were not believers. A couple of the scribes were not believers. They didn't scribe a great length of the text, but their handwriting is there. Joseph was letting non-unbelievers, watch and even participate. So hiding something from them would have been a challenge. And
especially if one has to place a stone in the hat. Something tells me Jared didn't actually put a stone in the hat, because if not, it could have caused some injury when he was trying to demonstrate it. But but that's not novel. She actually once told Lou Midgley and Matthew Roper that was the case as well.
The creativity, we mentioned the 170 original English proper nouns. Now, most of us here could do that, but it would take time and effort. And there's 100 titles for deity, 207 characters, and only about a third of these are major characters. But you still got to make up the names in a brief profile for the remaining 2/3 that aren't major characters. There's 149 promised land locations, 45 social geographic groups. There's just a lot of creativity required from the get-go and continually during the creative process. And so whoever's doing this is creating or recreating the Book of Mormon would need to have some of these skills. Now, what I'd like to do, if it's okay, Robert, is just quote Grant Hardy. He makes a point here, and it was in an interview, and I transcribed it, and I just think it's really an important observation. He said this: one thing that's hard for me. Oh, and by the way, Grant Hardy wrote, is it Understanding the Book of Mormon? But he's a college professor in North Carolina, I think, and super smart guy. And has written
Understanding the Book of Mormon, for those who may not know, it's published by Oxford University Press. It's kind of an analysis of the literary nature of the Book of Mormon and its complexity and so forth. And he actually argues there's different authors in the text and so forth. So, very good book.
And he's reformatted the Book of Mormon and created a really readable version of it that I think the latest version was done by the Neil A. Maxwell Institute. But he said this: one thing that's hard for me to imagine is a novelist who can create characters who are wiser and smarter and more mature than he or she might be. That just doesn't happen. I don't want to disparage Joseph Smith in any way, but Mormon, Moroni, and Nephi seem wiser. They seem smarter. They seem more experienced. They seem more deliberate and more careful than what I think the 24-year-old Joseph was. There is a kind of wisdom that is shown in Nephi's coming to terms with the difficulties of his life. There's a kind of maturity that we see in Mormon as a military leader, as a historian, as a father, as a political leader at the time when his civilization is not just in crisis, but is clearly going under. And there's a poignancy in trying to deal with that I think is completely lost on Joseph. Certainly it would have been lost on me when I was 24 years old. So what we find is a level of sophistication in some of the behaviors of the characters in the Book of Mormon, at least for some observers. People may disagree. There's certainly a lot of very one-dimensional characters that are come and go, but I just think that you can't really portray somebody as smarter than the author. I mean, that's counterintuitive. So the person who's doing this needs to have a pretty good imagination, and you would think some education or a lot of extensive experience, at least as much experience reflected as reflected by any of the characters. So the third skill is what I call research and comprehension skills. And somebody could be a really good writer, but if they don't know how to do research and understand what they're reading when they are doing the research, they're going to waste a lot of time and probably not get the type of data that they need to be able to write. You really can't write without some kind of data, and you want to collect a lot more material usually than you're going to use. And that's really painful if you've written a book, because you have these quotations and these ideas and you just love them to death, but your editor's saying, no, they don't get to stay, but you really need data to be able to do this. So The Book of Mormon has some fairly detailed discussions about religious topics that you couldn't get just, I would argue, you can't get it just by reading the Bible. You're not going to understand the nuance. You would go to camp meetings and things like this, but it seems like the level of detail in Joseph's descriptions that he would have had to do additional research, additional discussions with preachers or reading additional books and like that. Another good example is that there's work through there's a map of the old world where Lehi is going south and then he's going to the east, but you'd have to have some idea of the geography of the old world, and it just seems like there would have needed to be some research, and some historians, primarily critics, are saying, oh yeah, we bet Joseph was out going to bookstores. There were all these libraries. It's like if you can prove that there were 200 libraries within 2 miles of Joseph Smith's house, and I'm exaggerating, but somehow by showing that they existed is showing that Joseph went there, when if he had done that, the people who knew him probably would have remembered it and accused him of gaining knowledge to be the author. None of that happened. Nobody thought Joseph Smith could have been the author. Not a single person that I found thought he could do it, or did they remember him doing this kind of research. The fourth skill I call story and sermon composing skills. In other words, you'd want to have some experience in composition. And my friend, Bill Davis, I hope I can call him my friend. He's a nice guy. He's the one who wrote Visions in a Seer Stone. And I applaud him for trying to ask the question and answer it of how did Joseph do this naturally. I don't buy his explanation as being complete. It's a nice little piece of what would have been needed.
And by the way, anyway, I should note that you do actually have a review on the Interpreter website, as does Brent Garner of that book. So if anyone's interested, I know it's kind of popular in some ex-Mormon circles, like John DeLynne's circles. So be sure to check out both Brian's review as well as Brent Garner's review of the book. Just thought I'd mention that.
Well, and what I was saying is, and they just barely reprinted this in an anthology, but he wrote an article on Joseph Smith's education, published in Dialogue several years ago. But in there, he says that Joseph said he only learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, but Bill disagrees. He says, no, he learned a whole list of things, including composition. And there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence that in the 1820s, upstate New York district schools were teaching composition. And you've got to ask the question, what are they writing on and what are they writing with? Paper was very expensive. The Book of Mormon is written on 5 different kinds of paper because paper was not that plentiful. And this idea that Joseph was taught on composition is simply not supported. And so, again, when we talk about composition skills, I think we need to just recognize that Joseph didn't have any so far as the historical record goes. And he never would have written a 3-page essay on some topic or a 5-page creative writing story on something and turned it into a teacher who then corrected it and handed it back to him. He may have written a couple of letters, as you probably know, before the Book of Mormon was finished. We don't have dates exactly for them, but that would have been the sum total of his composition skills. So, but you'd have to, because there are 77 storylines, you'd have to have, you would think, a little bit of experience in composition and rhetoric. The sermon composing, again, that putting, understanding a topic doesn't necessarily mean that you can compose that into a narrative that's going to be pleasing to read or to listen to. We admit that the preachers of the day, some of them were very eloquent, and they could just stand up and go off, and Joseph is often compared to preachers. And I've done some research on this, but what the preacher is doing is very different from this dictating the Book of Mormon. And I think the dissimilarities disallow this as a theory, a valid theory of how Joseph might have done it, because he wasn't an orator. There's no record of him giving us a full speech at any time prior to his dictating the Book of Mormon. The fifth skill is one I've alluded to already. It's just memorization skills. we have to decide, did he make up all this content ahead of time and memorize it? Or was his creativity and extemporaneous speaking skills, which we'll talk about in a minute, just so refined that he could just put it all together in one moment? I don't think either is very plausible, but we have to admit that either way, he's going to have to be remembering a lot, because even if the content were created in the moment, Joseph Smith is going to have to use memory to remember what he dictated last week and what he dictated 20 minutes ago. He's also going to have to remember the first half of the sentence that he's creating as he creates the second half of the sentence. So we see long-term memory, short-term memory, all kinds of memory is being required, totally independent of where the content is coming from. And this I think would be somewhat difficult to duplicate. And I'll just add, Joseph Smith isn't known to have had a great memory. He wasn't dumb. I mean, he had a memory, but when he tried to learn the Hebrew in 1835-36, he struggled to some degree. There are over 70 references to him studying the Hebrew, but when the class was over, the star student was Orson Pratt. It wasn't Joseph Smith. Orson got a certificate saying he could be a teacher. Joseph got a certificate saying if he continues to study, he'll become proficient, which is really saying nothing at all if you think about it. So again, the level of memory that would be required to do this dictation, I think, is fairly significant. And we remember that the 207 characters are mentioned 3,780 times with only 2 possible mistakes. That's pretty good memory. So the next skill is the extemporaneous speaking skill. And this is something that's described. There are classes on college level teaching people to stand up. And extemporaneous means that they're talking on a topic that's not totally spontaneous. These are topics that you could kind of study for, and debaters do extemporaneous speaking, but they're told ahead of time what the topics are going to be. So they go home and they do study, they get ideas in their head, they practice certain things. And you would expect that to be more analogous to what Joseph Smith was doing, that somehow he had already prepared for this dictation, or some say he was doing it the night before. But the extemporaneous speaking skills would have had to been fairly, I think, fairly developed. And some people want to say, well, the Book of Mormon, it's just terrible English, and there's nothing worth thinking about, worrying about it. This is just a simplistic text and going on. Really, that's not a good characterization. Let me just share with you what some college professors, none of whom are Latter-day Saints, have said. Kenneth Wynne at Washington University said the Book of Mormon is a masterpiece of the most uncommon common man. The Yale University Chair of History, Daniel Howe Walker, said the Book of Mormon should rank among the great achievements of American literature. Gordon S. Wood, who later got the Pulitzer Prize, said that the Book of Mormon is an extraordinary work of popular imagination and one of the greatest documents in American cultural history. Nathan O. Hatch, again, a real well-known author, said it was an extraordinary work. So I offer those quotes here. We can't just dismiss the book saying, oh, he was a dummy, the book is dumb. The book is sophisticated, it's lengthy, it's complex. And it was spoken. The dictation part of it, I think, increases the difficulty by a factor of 10, at least, to be able to do it. Now, let me just interject here, Robert, one literary characteristic that I skipped. It's the most remarkable one. Can you guess what it might be? What I found is that the most remarkable thing is that the Book of Mormon has not had a full sentence edit since Joseph Smith spoke the word stream, and that's pretty remarkable. Now, some people will say it needs some edits that are big, but really most of the edits that are still needed are small. But a fun study that Gerald Tanner did back in the 60s, maybe early 70s. But it's been a very popular book, but he took the 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon, and he took a 1964 copy, and he just went through manually This is not a very scientific study, but he just manually identified all of the differences between the two texts. He entitled it 3,913 Changes in the Book of Mormon. And I imagine it's probably sold fairly well. But the implication, of course, is that if the book were a translation that was inspired, it shouldn't need so many changes. Well, I went through and I created an Excel sheet with 584 lines. Some of the front matter takes up the 588 page number of the 1830 Book of Mormon. But I have a line that identifies what kind of a change and how many that Gerald identified on each of the pages. And by that accounting, there's only 3,898 changes in the actual Book of Mormon itself. And of those, 3,557 are single word changes. And 220 are double word changes. And then another 42 are 3-word changes. See, this is copy editing. This is not draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. These are small changes. Now, there are around 80 changes that involve 4 to 13 words. Half of those are just Joseph Smith deleting "it came to pass," still leaving over 1,400 of them. There's quite a few still remaining. But if you look at the other 34, you discover that these deletions and additions really are big nothing as far as meaning goes. You even wonder why some of them were changed by Joseph Smith. But clearly there's no evidence that he is writing a second draft or doing what we would call content editing. And so for that type, and again, this, in my view, is the most remarkable thing Joseph Smith ever did. If Joseph Smith was not inspired by God, the most remarkable thing he did in his entire life was dictate a text that was as refined as the Book of Mormon word stream, in my view, in my opinion. And that's what brings us back to the sixth skill of extemporaneous speaking, because I think what he did would have been quite difficult, simply because you're getting so many words and things right, or 98% right, and you're doing this for 3 months and for nearly 270,000 words. Now, the last three skills.
Well, before you kind of go on to the last three, if I could just you actually do have a very good article on some of the more quote unquote, I would say, problematic changes, like the Benjamin Mosiah variant in Mosiah 21 and Eater 4 and a few others. But I'm kind of glad you kind of mentioned the changes, because typically when it comes to, say, like a lot of presentations by critics to the changes in the Book of Mormon, a lot of people who may be a bit new or green will think like, well, this means that the Book of Mormon originally read X, Y, and Z, and now reads not X, Y, and Z. But as you note, and very good plug for the works of Ralph Skousen on the textual variants in the Book of Mormon and other stuff like that, there's no change that actually alters the narrative structure at all of the Book of Mormon. You can get the same theology or narrative from, say, the 1830 text or the extant printers and original manuscript as you can with the current 2013 printing as well. So, there, as you know, like, there's no second draft, if you will, post 1830. And for those who claim like some of the changes reflect like a theological shift from a form of modalism to like tritheism, look up the 3-hour interview I had with Stephen Murphy, where I went through all the purported instances of modalism in early LDS theology. I think I won him over on that one, but just a plug for a previous episode. But I just thought I'd throw that in before you continue the next few points.
Well, and you bring up a good point, Robert, that there are 4 changes, and there's only 4 really, that the critics say are doctrinal. Let's talk about them quickly. One is the mother of God is changed to the mother of the Son of God in 4 places. I'm sorry about that. I'm getting some messages here. The second one is white is changed to white and delights in people is changed to pure and delights in people in one place. The third one is exchanged for a comma in 2 places, so that the Son of the only begotten of the Father reads the Son, comma, the only begotten of the Father. And then the fourth one is the Mosiah Benjamin. Yeah. Those are the ones that are called doctrinal, and I think they're all just clarifying. I mean, we could argue all day, but certainly these aren't huge doctrinal things. When anybody says they're doctrinal changes by Joseph, I'm going, you're not being very transparent, because these are not significant. You think doctrinal, you think he's spinning something on the Trinity or spinning something on baptism or something, but that just simply isn't.
Yeah, and not to like beat a dead horse, but when it comes to say the mother of God and the mother of son of God, Latter-day Saint theology, even if you even in Joseph's later theology, is consistent with both, because Jesus is a God. In a sense, he's a divine person, but he's also distinct from his father, who's also God. And so, yes, that could be consistent with a form of modalism, but it's also consistent with tritheism and Trinitarianism. Personally, I believe Joseph's just going to make the change so he won't be accused of quote-unquote Romanism, which was the church of the time, because Catholics do abuse Mary being the mother of God. I mean, she's the mother of God, in the sense she's the mother of Jesus, but they tend historically, especially in the 19th century, to like push the envelope and claim, well, if she's the mother of God, that means Immaculate Conception, which we defined in 1854, and so forth. So, and personally, I don't believe the Benjamin Mosiah variant was actually needed. I tend to agree with a couple others, but even if that's the case, this is kind of the example. These are the type of examples that you can find in the biblical texts of later historians like fudging things as well. John Trattus actually has a very good study in his book, paper, The Mistakes of Men, from a fair conference, where he shows, even in the Book of Kings, there's a similar parallel to the Benjamin Mosiah issue as well, where the narrator confuses like one king who was dead and presents him as being alive at the time he's talking about. So these are the type of slips you find in historical documents, not just like a 19th century text as well.
You know, Robert, I wish I were half as smart as you, and I wish I had half the database in my head that you have. I did listen to your modalism podcast, and it's like, whoa, these are smart people. So,
well, coming from you, that's high praise, because you're a smart monkey yourself. So, thank you.
I'm a lot older. I'm twice your age, and still trying to learn. But I do want to make one other comment on these doctrinal changes, the 9 specific changes that I just outlined. There were 4, but some of them involved more than one place that the change was made. They only altered 17 words of the text. So if we want to sum up the total doctrinal changes, there were 4 that involved 17 words. Again, this is not draft 2. This is not moving a paragraph or a sentence, even or 2 or 3 sentences. These are not huge changes. The Book of Mormon, as it came from Joseph's mouth, is remarkably refined. And so let's talk about the speaking side of things. The oratorical formatting skill. This is skill number 7, and the next 3 are all about speaking. I had to make up that. Have you ever heard of oratorical formatting skills?
No. I have an idea what it's about, but I never actually heard that term before. So,
well, I actually went to the library and tried to find anything similar to that in books that they had on the college level for classes, and I did a word search and everything. I'm making this up, but the reason I'm making it up is that you look at the text of the Book of Mormon as Joseph is speaking it. There's formatting that occurs in the text, and some of it isn't that hard to understand. For example, speaking in sentences that are on average 40 words long, you could probably get into the hang of doing that. But he's also speaking in a vernacular that's not his everyday speech. Well, you could probably get to do that too. People can learn how to speak in Southern, or I don't know. I don't want to offend any group out there listening, but so you probably could figure out how to do this. But speaking at an 8th grade level all the time, that would be something that Don Bradley pointed out, that people wonder if Joseph Smith the Book of Mormon is on Joseph Smith's writing level, but of education, but it's a question whether it's even on his reading level of education, having only attended district school, and by my count, it was about a 3rd grade level, despite what others have said. There's sectional formatting. We talked about this stylometrically. You've got to remember, oh, wait, this is Nephi talking here, so let's sound like Nephi. Oh, this is Mormon. Let's sound like Mormon. Oh, this is Alma speaking inside of Mormon. So here's how he's going to sound. So, and these are very real things. You don't even need a computer to recognize, I think, that there are different voices in the Book of Mormon that the author is going to have to create in real time. there's specific formatting, and these are things, the intertextuality with the Bible, the allusions there. Now, the easy way out of that is to just say, oh, Joseph Smith had read the Bible so much he had it almost memorized. And the problem with that is we have a couple of eyewitnesses at the time of the dictation who said Joseph really wasn't very familiar with the Bible. His familiarity came later during the next 3 years as he bought a copy and with Sidney Rigdon went through and translated the Bible or revised the Bible. So, but in 1829, claims that he had memorized the Bible, their only evidence that they can produce is the Book of Mormon itself, because there's so much integrated phraseology that is similar to what's in the Bible. The last form of formatting is to me kind of the funnest, and that's parallel formatting. And the what I'm talking about are the parallelisms of chiasm and alternates. Now, an alternate is the same thing as a chiasm, except that it goes forward and then goes forward again instead of backwards. And the chiasms, there's been a lot of discussion about whether chiasms in the Book of Mormon are an evidence of antiquity. People want to say, oh, there's chiasms. The Book of Mormon, didn't come from Joseph. It came from gold plates. Well, that whole discussion, I frankly don't care about, to be honest with you. It doesn't really have any real power to me. But thinking about a chiasm as something you create in real time, verbally, vocally, to me now that is something that demands some discussion, and I think it would demand some expertise. I did have kind of a fun experience, and this again is with William Davis, Bill Davis. He and I were having an exchange on a Facebook thread a while back, and I was saying that I thought that the chiasms would have required some skill, and he was disagreeing. But the funny thing was, the next day he came back and he had taken one of my longer previous posts that I put on the Facebook thread, and he had formatted it into a perfect 3-level chiasm. I mean, it was brilliant. I still think about it as great. And what he proved was that chiasms occur spontaneously. But the problem is that they don't all occur spontaneously. And you can dismiss some of them like that, I think, absolutely. But if you look at Alma 36, and I know a lot has been written on it by Wonderly and Jack Welch, and if you study those 1,200 words or so, you can show that there's an 8-level chiasm. Some people want to inflate that number, but just stay with 8. And you find those 8 words, each one is restricted to a block of words in their respective locations. In other words, if Joseph is dictating this, he's saying, okay, I'm going to do a chiasm. This word occurs right now, and I can't use any of the other 7 words. And then he goes into the next block mentally. And he goes, okay, now I'm going to use the second word, but I can't use any of the other 7 words. And he'd have to mentally be stacking these blocks of words, isolating only the word he wants to use, not using the other, and then repeat that backwards. And I think that is a skill. I don't know what to call it, so I called it oral formatting skills. And as an example, though, I think the chiasms, the alternates, some of them could be just accidental or spontaneously forming. But when you look closely at some of the more complex ones, to say that these just happened, I think is not realistic, at least for me.
Yeah, and just on that, there was actually a very good article from BYU Studies a couple of years ago by Bide F. Edwards and W. Farrell Edwards. Does chiasmus appear in the Book of Mormon by chance? The instances of chiasmus, not all of them. I think some LDS have kind of pushed the envelope here and there, but there are some instances of intentional chiastic structures in the Book of Mormon, showing that this wasn't not accidental. This was planned either by Joseph Smith, if you're a naturalist, or the authors or editors of the text.
Well, with everything that the author's got to think about, the wordsmithing and stuff, and then to be formatting it this way, that's an incredible skill to me. The eighth skill, and there's only 9 in total. The eighth one is, I have, again, it sounds like a made up skill because I didn't know what else to call it, but it's mental redrafting. And if you've ever written a book, you know it goes through multiple drafts. They always do. You get with your editor, and again, I'm not saying the Book of Mormon is perfect. If you handed it to an editor, they would have some recommendations. Editing is very subjective. But it is still very highly refined, and I would argue that even that most editors looking at it would just be doing copy edits. They wouldn't say, well, this section is inconsistent with that section, therefore and this section should be before that one. I mean, it flows, I think, very logically, and he must be doing all this drafting, this movement of sentences and paragraphs in his head before he actually speaks it. I think everybody is familiar with the statement, there is no good writing, there is only good rewriting. And really it's something that almost all writers do, and it's kind of an expectation for it. So the last skill is what I've called textual processing skills. And this came up originally, I didn't have this here, my early list didn't have it. But when you try to do the 30,000 foot view of what's going on here, what we have is we've got several different threads going through the author's brain all at the same time. There's the thread of the plot, okay, or the sermon, whatever the message that's trying to get out has got to, is the primary thing that you're thinking about. But it also has thread 2, which is the context. It's the, where is it being said? Who is saying it? Who is it saying to? How does it fit in to the dynamics of the moment? The third thread involves remembering this has to occur at an 8th grade level and in long sentences in a non-standard dialect. And you need to have the right voice of the current author and all of these kind of general things. You just got to remember those while you're doing all this other stuff. The fourth thread involves memory feedbacks from your previous dictations. How does what I'm saying relate to what I said last week or what I said 2 minutes ago? And a fifth thread chooses the vocabulary and starts to do the actual wordsmithing. This creates the sentences. And again, if you've ever done writing or speaking, trying to get an eloquent or at least a sentence that makes sense, that wordsmithing process to me is very intellectually demanding. And just a single sentence, I can spend 30 minutes on it and then the next day come back and just delete it. You know, I mean, that's how I work. But other authors, I don't know. But the wordsmithing is thread number 5. And then on thread 6, you've got the content editing, the copy editing that finalizes that. And then the thread number 7 is where your brain turns that into a vocal word stream. And that doesn't take a lot of work, but we all misspeak, and that would be helping the person not say the wrong words, mean one thing, say another. And if you think about all of these threads coming together simultaneously, I think to be able to process them all and do it as efficiently as Joseph did, that would require what I'm calling an intellectual processing skill. And so if we could find somebody who has all of these skills, theoretically, they should be able to sit down if you could incentivize them. And again, you got to give them you got to employ them for 3 months to try to duplicate what Joseph will do. And this is kind of unfortunate because I don't think we'll ever have anybody who will actually duplicate it using their own intellect. But it's a question that's still out there. Could we find somebody who would develop these skills and then duplicate it? I don't think we need to take time to go through and ask, did Joseph have these skills? I've kind of commented on that as we go along. Joseph was 23 years old, probably had a 3rd grade education. Nobody who knew him believed he was the author. And yet that is the most popular theory among the secularists today. They just grant Joseph any skill that he needed. Oh yeah, he could do that. Oh yeah, he could do that. And yet the historical record contradicts virtually all of that. Now, Joseph wasn't dumb. I'm not saying he was dumb. He's very intelligent, but he didn't have, at age 23, the skills that we've identified here. So either I'm identifying the wrong skills, or else there's something going on here that we've yet to explain, and we could enter the supernatural explanation, which again is not the purpose of what I'm trying to do here. I just want to get us through all of the natural explanations and see if they're plausible. And if they're not, well, the listener, the audience can decide what they want to do with that information. Let me add one last thing. This is kind of a fun little quote. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, he said this about trying to mentally solve the multiplication of 17 times 24. He's illustrating how many levels of thought a person can handle easily. And he says, try to multiply 17 by 24 in your head right now. And he said, you first retrieve from memory the cognitive program for multiplication that you learned in school, and then you implement it. You carrying out the computation was a strain. You felt the burden of holding much material in memory, as you needed to keep track of where you were and where you are going while holding on to the intermediate result. The process was mental work, deliberate, effortful, orderly. And then he warns, he said, you should never try to do this while making a left turn in traffic.
That's true. In fact, I actually tried doing it. The answer is 402, I believe. 408, I believe. But how I was going about it was like so many steps. And I used to be trained as an accountant, so yeah.
Oh, well, I think I really like the illustration.
It's a very good one.
To then imagine anybody being able to create the Book of Mormon. I think the skill set is very deep, and I think it goes beyond what Joseph had. And we can look at the historical record on. Well, you don't need to. You could do that, but we can also look at human performance maximums and ask ourselves, could anybody do this? I've read books that are written by geniuses. None of them dictate a book and then send it to their editor, and the editor says, oh, this is great, let's publish it. I mean, that doesn't happen. They're back and forth, it's tedious, they're struggling, and I can't find any genius that would be a parallel to what Joseph Smith has done. Now, do we have just another 5 minutes? I'll introduce one other idea.
No, you can take as long as you want.
Well, at this point, I had again been exchanging things with my friend Dan Vogel, who, of course, he describes himself as a pure naturalist. And he made the comment that there are lots of people who have done what Joseph Smith did. And I was taken aback. I'm thinking, what is he talking about? Has he found some new database that I'm unaware of, or what's going on? Well, as it turns out, he's referring to automatic writers. And for the audience who don't know, I wrote an article, was published in Dialogue. Maybe you can put a link to that too. But there are individuals who create book-length manuscripts, just like Joseph Smith. And Bob Rees doesn't think Joseph belongs in the same category as Bob doesn't think Joseph Smith belongs in the same category as other automatic writers. I think he does, because these writers produce very long and complex refined scripts. The complexity and refinement go way beyond their natural skills. They don't have training in writing and composition and rhetoric, and many of them have a level of education slightly more than Joseph Smith. They will tell you they are not the source of the word, so that's an important thing. When they say these words didn't come from my intellect, you believe them because you talk to them and you realize they're not that intellectual. And they will all claim that this came from some other place. We could just group all of this into like a supernatural. It came from an angel, from God, from a Martian, from a book that's already been magically delivered, or whatever. But we group all these together as automatic writers, even though, like Joseph Smith, he didn't write it. He dictated it with a seer stone. They could come through Ouija boards. They can come in a trance. They can come in a variety of ways that are described. In fact, William Davis wrote a really fine article on Andrew Jackson Davis, who produced a very lengthy, complex book by going into a trance. And again, he wasn't highly educated. You wouldn't expect him to be able to produce these words as refined as they were. And Bill Davis's conclusion is, see, Joseph did it and Andrew Jackson Davis did it. So boom, it's not supernatural. Well, and I shouldn't misrepresent Bill, but he draws a distinct parallel between automatic writing and Joseph Smith's production of the Book of Mormon. And yet the take-home message there is like, well, so how do all these words come about? Where do they come from? Where did Andrew Jackson Davis get his volume? Or where did Joseph Smith get his words? And there's still no answer, no definitive naturalist answer for how this happens. And of course, if we dive into Joseph Smith's theology, the answer is quite simple. Joseph Smith got his words from God. Shortly after the Book of Mormon is published, Hiram Page has a seer stone. He produces pages of revelation, and people are believing him. And so Joseph gets another revelation that says that Hiram is being deceived by the adversary. So in Joseph's teachings, there's true spirits, there's false spirits, and Joseph is talking to the true spirits, and the false spirits can influence whoever they will. And that may sound too binary, too simplistic a dichotomy, but really that's what Joseph would say, he did say, with respect to Hiram Page. So the reason I add this is, as a theory, the idea that Joseph produced the Book of Mormon like automatic writers produce their texts, that's not an explanation. And we shouldn't be fooled by that if somebody wants to draw the parallel and then walk away as if it's been explained.
No, that's a good point. The automatic writing thing, that was kind of made popular like in the Anthology American Apocrypha when they reprinted like a dialogue article on that. But I don't even think Metcalf or Dan Vogel actually would give credence to automatic writing. I think they only included it to quote unquote answer the claim, well, the Book of Mormon's lengthy, so Joseph could not have produced it in X amount of weeks, and trying to show, no, there's parallel instances. But as you note in your dialogue article, and I'll link to it in the show notes and other works, you're comparing apples and oranges. It's not in that kind of ballpark, if you will.
Well, it isn't a naturalistic explanation. I mean, if you had a natural explanation for how Pro Puran produced her book, or Andrew Jackson Davis produced his book, then you could maybe use that natural explanation to explain how Joseph did it, but there is none. And I don't want to imply that Dan Vogel really believes that automatic writing is how Joseph did it. He was just throwing out words, I think, to me to, he likes a spirited discussion. And
I'm not trying to give the impression like Vogel has changed his mind. Like he just probably just included that just to show, like, no, there's similarly lengthy works, that's been producing the same amount of time, to answer that apologetic. But I'll link to your dialogue article on automatic writing and update in the show notes as well as your other material.
Okay, well, and getting back to the original two questions, what skills would be needed to dictate a long, complex book? My conclusion is it's quite a long list of deep skills. What skills did Joseph have in 1829? Well, it's a much smaller list. There's a gap there. That was the theme, Mind the Gap, that I presented at FAIR. But in that presentation, I didn't talk at all about the skills because I hadn't tried to figure it out yet. I just generated the list of characteristics, and then you have to go backwards from that to try to identify the skills. And it was arduous. It took me quite a while to try to identify 9 skills that ostensibly could enable somebody to perform that kind of an oral performance.
No, that's good. So the TLDR version, if you will, is basically the Book of Mormon's a very complex text, and you just can't simply claim Joseph came up with it. You have to build up on that if you want to have a naturalistic explanation for the text. And it can't be Solomon Spaulding or anyone like that as well.
Well, and one other thing I'll just add, I still see people looking at View of the Hebrews. And B.H. Roberts drew a parallel of about 20 things, 25, somewhere in there. And then people say, see, there's these things that are common to the Book of Mormon. Ta-da, there's the explanation. But when we get into the list of literary characteristics, a list of 20 things, and some of them are really general. And then we see Joseph is making up 77 storylines, 149 geographical areas. How helpful could that possibly have been?
Many of the parallels can be explained through like a biblical knowledge. Like they like to quote Isaiah. Well, so did the Old Testament prophets and stuff like that. And some of these parallels, as you know, they're pretty weak, and they're not really explanatory to the narrative of the structure of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, I think a lot of the theories that are put forth just kind of flow away because you realize that even if the naturalist argument were totally true, Joseph is still left having to create 200,000 words or 80 or 90% of the storylines and sermons. I mean, they can't possibly help him very much because there is such a volume of things that the Book of Mormon has as part of its literary characteristics.
Yeah, and to give an example of like this, you kind of mentioned it briefly. I'm just going to plug the issue of names in the Book of Mormon, how Joseph had to come up with new proper names and so forth. Um, I'm going to plug the work of a friend of mine, Matthew Bowen. He's done a lot of excellent work on the names of the Book of Mormon, but also the wordplays based on the Hebrew and Egyptian etymology of these words, like Jershon and Zarahemla and Mormon. So for those listening, be sure to check out Matthew Bowen, Bowen, his work on the names that's been published with the Interpreter Journal. And there's also a very good book that's just recently came out, Dictionary of Proper Names and Foreign Words in the Book of Mormon, edited by Ricks et al. As well. One of my favorite topics to discuss is, like, say, the Old Testament or ancient Near Eastern background of the Book of Mormon, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in just those works as well. So I just thought I'd plug it for those who want to delve more into that particular topic.
Great. Yeah. Matthew Bowman has done incredible work. So,
yeah, that's good. So, Brian, I'm sure like some maybe listening, like, do you actually, I know you presented on this at the FAIR conference and you've touched upon on like various interpreter articles. Do you hope to like expand upon this in a forthcoming article or a forthcoming book or some other published venue?
well, I've had this material at both at a scholarly quarterly and at a potential publishing house, and it's just the beginning. I just want the data. I think it tells a story, and we could even go back for believers, as I am. DNC 20 verse 11 says that the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, as it's described in verses 6 through 10, is proving to the world that the scriptures are true and that God does call and inspire men in this ages and ages past. The word proving there just stuck out at me. It's like proving. I mean, you can't prove anything to anyone ever. I mean, you can just present a lot of really good data, but this revelation says that if the coming forth of the Book of Mormon is proving God lives, that God exists and calls prophets. So this research is not trying to prove the Book of Mormon, but I am trying to understand what that scripture is referring to. And this gap that seems to be there. And even if people don't like what I'm saying or agree with me, I'm happy if we can just start the conversation, break that two-level chiasm, the circular reasoning about Joseph having all the gifts needed. Let's start talking about what the gifts that would be needed, and then we can look historically and see what gifts we can document in Joseph having. That's the conversation I hope goes forward, even if it turns out some of the stuff that I'm concluding here needs to be highly revised. That's okay. I don't think it does because I've spent a lot of time looking at it, but it wouldn't, I'd be happy to do it if we can just start talking about it.
Yes, have a better conversation than simply throw, say, View of the Hebrews or the Late War or other really lousy explanations for the Book of Mormon. And for those who may want to like reach out to you, like, is there any way to contact you and any and would you actually have any if someone wants to delve more into, say, the Book of Mormon and its background, any suggested articles or books that you would recommend?
This is a new topic, and so I did publish in BYU Studies in 2019. In fact, it came out at the same time the automatic writing article came out, an article that looked historically at the popularity of 5 different theories. And Solomon Spaulding theory was really high for 50 years until they found the manuscript in 1884 and discovered there's no way this was the source of the Book of Mormon. But there's 3 others. There's automatic writing, co-conspirator, Spaulding, and then the 5th one that I identified. And I would probably break that into 8 today if I were to rewrite it. But the most popular one is that Joseph just had the intellect and just burned it out. He just, boom, he was able to do it. That's clearly the most popular today. So that article might be interesting to people. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to that one as well as your other work on from Interpreter and Dialogue as well. With that, Brian, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on to discuss this very important topic, the Book of Mormon. And hopefully we can actually have you on again in the near future. But I'm sure I speak for those who are listening. We do look forward to your forthcoming development and presentations on this and other topics as well. Especially, uh, and also you've written some doctrinal books as well. I should note as well, including books such as Light. So it's not just polygamy you're an expert in. You've actually delved into other topics as well. I actually have your 3 doctrinal books, and I thought they were very fascinating. So there you go.
Well, if I were going to have an expertise, I would choose something other than polygamy. So,
Well, someone has to delve into that topic. And, fortunately,
Right.
you've done a very good job on it. So
Well,
there
thank
you go.
you.
But
Very
with that,
kind.
hopefully we can actually have you on in the future. But until then, like all the best with your forthcoming projects and so forth. I'm looking forward to them, and I'm sure others are as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate it.